I've been on FBI raids where I've seen things that no person should ever see.
I was lured out of one of their girls' homes into prostitution.
When I was 9 and 10, we lived on the street near the stadium. Male adults would come and they take us.
For someone like Sarah, who's never been loved by her own mother, who never knew her father, how does she understand love?
Welcome to Sea Shift, a program where we look into how attitudes and ideas have shifted over changing years, changing ideas, changing realities. And today we're looking at prostitution. What's shifted in the oldest profession that has made it possible for women to speak out about victimization, for police to change their approach, for lawmakers to drastically change the effect of punishment and the consequences around buying and selling sex? We begin with the high personal cost.
It started at an early age. I was adopted into a non-Native family, so right there I suffered the effects of colonialism and being not the same race as my adopted family. And also I had endured child sexual abuse, which made me a perfect candidate for prostitution. On top of not fitting in racially and you know, being sexually abused, my parents didn't understand what was going on. They felt that because it was a good home, that I was acting out, and they placed me into children's aid, back to the care of the society. And from there, I was lured out of one of their girls' homes into prostitution.
So tell us your experience in prostitution.
My experience was, it was very hard. I suffered many years of indignity. I got lured out and worked for a woman who ran a legal establishment in Halifax, where I was flown out at the age of 12, 13 to this brothel, and where I worked and stayed with her and her kids.
At 13, you were flown to a brothel.
Yes. It was weird because I was told that if the police did ever encounter us, to just say that I was either a relative or one of her daughter's friends. So, and at this time, you got to understand, I'm a ward of Children's Aid. So, and you know, like not once was I ever asked flying if I had ID, who I was going to see. Not once was I ever even questioned.
Do you consider that trafficked?
Oh, I was trafficked. Definitely, I was trafficked. I was in my early 20s, and I found myself sinking into addiction and sinking into despair. I found myself actually incarcerated for prostitution-related offenses.
You testified before the parliamentary committee in favor of Bill C-36. Do you believe this bill will help women like you? I think you were.
I think it will save women. I think that we need to look at the damage that men who pay for sex, what they do to prostituted women and girls. I think that our bodies aren't commodities, and there's a sacredness when it comes to sex, and it's totally not looked at. It's not enjoyment on the seller's behalf, it's enjoyment for the buyer. And these men do things with you that they wouldn't ask their wives to do. It's very degrading and humiliating. You have to gauge them. If their pupils are dilating, you know you're going to be in a fight. And I believe that prostitution is a form of paid rape.
Pay rape.
Mm-hmm.
Pay rape. Bridget, you also believe that God has walked into your experience of being a prostitute.
Well, I've been told I was bad ever since I was 11, 12 years old. And, you know, I believed it. And at one point, I was in isolation when I was incarcerated. And one of my children were dying. My son was dying. And that night God spoke to me, and he said to me that I was loved. And when I was feeling alone, that he was with me at all times, and to be quiet and to be still and to listen. And I shouldn't have went up for bail the next day, and I got released on bail because I believe that God had a plan for me.
God's really been a game changer for you. Mm-hmm. What do you say to somebody who's still stuck?
There's hope. No matter what, there's people out there that love you, and when you don't think that you're lovable, or anyone could love you, there are people. We at Sex Trade 101, we see our girls, our victims, as not victims, as survivors, and we believe they're viable human beings, and they have a right to have someone treat them with dignity and respect. And those women that are saying they choose to be in this type of work, we need to understand that word choice. When you have no choice and you're stuck in a situation, you have to say you're choosing it. It's a survival mechanism. I became a doormat for men, and to honestly say now that I know that this is now a problem that men need to fix, and with each other, and say, hey, I don't feel it's a appropriate thing to pay for sex.
Bridget, Sex Trade 101 is well publicized. It's on the internet, available, and it is just the beginning of how women can be connected for exiting the sex trade. Mm-hmm. Bridget Perry, thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
To Somalia now, how things have shifted for women at risk because one woman's making a remarkable difference.
My uncle was driving. It was a big car with a lot of my extended family. And it was about 11 o'clock at night, and we were driving on one of the main streets. And we saw this girl who was obviously working on the street, trying to get the attention of a car that was behind us. It was a man driving by himself. And she was very aggressive in the way she was trying to get his attention. And everybody in the car was really taken back. And because, you see, before that, during the communist time, curfew was at midnight. So we did not really know much about the nightlife out on the street. And everybody started to talk about how can anybody choose a life like this? Isn't she better off doing this and that? That made me very angry, because here I was with a degree and I couldn't find a job. And we did not plan on starting a project. We didn't plan on starting a ministry. We had made a decision, the two of us. We said we'll meet one or two girls and be friends with them and just offer our friendship. We were so nervous. I didn't know how to make the first contact. Our desire is to be friends with them, to befriend them. But in our culture, you don't say to somebody, I want to get to know you, I want to be friends with you. You don't. You just make the action to get to know them better. It was a pair of legs coming out of the darkness is what I saw. Very fair skin. She was wearing tight black mini skirt dress and with a bounce to her walk, and this time a little bit more experience. So I opened the window and I said, hi, my name is Cherry, this is Wendy, what's your name? She came up and she said, oh, my name is Rosa. So I said, would you like to go have some pizza? Sure. And she jumped right in the car. We're like, she's in the car, what do we do now? We had to get to a point of desperation ourselves because the girls were asking us. By that time, the Lord gave us a scripture. It's in Ephesians 3:20. It says, now to him who's able to do immeasurably more than all you ask or imagine, according to his power that's at work within us. To him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus. And the phrase that really caught our heart was, he would do it according to his power that's at work within us. And we realized, okay, he can do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine, but he would do it through us. So we kind of calmed down a little bit and we started talking to people. And by that time, 2 other ladies joined us. So we became 4.
Prostitution is growing every day. No one wants to talk about these things. And men are buying sex, by going marriage couple, single youngster, they just simply, whenever they want sex, they go and buy sex, even at daytime,
Ethiopians know that is a place where people come from the countryside, and it's a place for accessing goods. But in the dark side, behind the curtains, there is human trafficking going on in this area. We found there are so many ladies and they stand in the corner of the bus stop. They cover it all. You can find it from one corner to the next. The whole area of ladies, they are infinite, they are uncountable. Most of the time, they came with the relative and they separate. They disappeared from one another, and you see them crying and being stressed out and confused and not knowing where to go.
PureFlix.com is now available in Canada. Sign up today for your free 1-month trial and begin streaming over 3,500 titles.
It's from independent films to movies and short series.
Kids shows. Sign up for a free month. Give it a good try.
Watch your favorite content anywhere, anytime, like PureFlix original hit series Encounter. Enjoy the latest and best in faith and family entertainment. Available to you at the click of a button. Visit PureFlix.com and sign up for your free trial today. Brought to you by Crossroads.
Here are some of the stories making headlines this week.
Voters turning their outrage into online worldwide trends.
Why healthcare workers kill.
The opioid crisis is a health crisis.
So how do we weed out the noise?
Well, this is an issue our next guest is an expert on.
We have a lineup of religious leaders from the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish faith communities.
I'm Lorna Dueck.
And I'm Sheldon Neal.
And I'm Molly Thomas.
And you're watching Context Live. C-Shift is back, looking at the changing attitudes that have occurred over prostitution. Are we making it a better Canada? Joining us from Ottawa are two MPs at the centre of the prostitution law debate. Conservative MP Joy Smith supported Bill C-36 and championed its creation. NDP justice critic MP Françoise Boivin believes the new law is far from perfect. So, Joy Smith, let's begin with you. The underlying goal of this law is to say Canada does not condone selling sex. And it's a moral game changer on how we've looked at prostitution. Why such a strong and historic stand?
It's very important because in this country we have victims who are trafficked every day, underage kids. We have young people and older people that are forced into the sex trade. What's so historic is that the first time in Canadian history, the purchase of sex will be illegal. For the first time in Canadian history, there is support for the victims of human trafficking and prostitution to get out. It's very historic.
Okay, Françoise, what are your primary concerns? You're the opposition's justice critic. What are your primary concerns with this new legislation?
Well, first of all, it's the buying of sex that is primarily illegal now, very clearly. That I must say to the government, this is clear. The selling isn't. Which in my mind creates a big problem in a sense that the government kept saying throughout the committee hearing that since the women, because it's mostly women who are in the sex trade, are victims, we didn't want to victimize them more, so we wouldn't make them criminals. But they have the right to sell, but nobody can buy. So there's a bit of a problem. I see the underground business of selling sex getting even more underground, and we have to go back to the reason behind C-36, which was, according to its title, to be an answer to the Bedford decision. Bedford decision from the Supreme Court of Canada in December of 2013 was all about safety and security for those who are doing that highly, highly risky business.
Joy, that is the big critic of this bill. Mm-hmm. For all those who say, look, I'm not trafficked, I want to sell my body, this now makes their life more dangerous. What would you say?
In actual fact, what we're finding out right now is a lot of these victims are being controlled from inside by the pimps, by the Johns. The reason being, it's money. They make between $260,000, $280,000 per victim per year. Right now, everything is stacked against those in prostitution, those who were trafficked into prostitution. They have, on one hand, the pimps and the Johns that threaten them. They have to say what the pimps and the Johns tell them to say. But you know, how you cut everything off, and it's been proven in Sweden, Norway, and Iceland, that if you target the Johns and the pimps, and if you make the buying of sex illegal, I know in Sweden, after 2 years, 50% of the buying of sex, 75% actually, of the buying of sex stopped, and prostitution was cut by 50%.
Okay, I want to go to a voice of sad experience on this, and then ask you to comment. Angel Wolf is an advocate for children whose mothers were murdered by the sex killer Robert Pickton. He was that notorious Vancouver killer of prostitutes. Angel Wolf presented her statement to the parliamentary committee studying this law, and she said, I believe Bill C-36 will save vulnerable people like my mom. I blame prostitution and addiction for my mother's death. On behalf of the 98 orphans, we do not want our mothers' deaths to be the reason prostitution is legitimized. So, Francois, how I hear your concern for those who you don't want it to go more underground, but how does this now help a story like this one?
Well, I felt so, you know, everybody was really emotional when we heard all those stories because they are absolutely heartbreaking. And I was having a discussion with one of the policemen who came to testify in front of the committee. And in the cases, even the cases that Ms. Smith was talking about, where we know that there's people who are absolutely not doing prostitution on their own free will. This is a really slim percentage of the population who do so. But for the others, there's no real consent. So it already falls into sex exploitation and into human trafficking, which is not what Bedford decision was all about. So to think that C-36 will necessarily make it that situation that they were describing, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I do believe that to make such thing happen, you have, like they said, the people were the proponents for the Swedish model, that you need to put a lot of money into making sure that the women who think that that's their only way out of poverty, of drug dependence, and you have to help these people. And everybody was unanimous in saying the government was not serious with its $20 million to do so. So there's so many tools already in place, so much more tools that we can give to our policemen, to our special workers in those fields, and to help these people to get out.
This is new, this new $20 million fund to get out. Joy, how will this bill help the vulnerable?
It'll help the vulnerable because for the first time, the buying of sex will be a criminal offense. That automatically shuts off a lot of things. And the inner story that we hear all the time about the victims who have to do as they're told, it is modern day slavery, of the victims who can't get out because if they try, they'll be beaten, they'll be held hostage, they'll be told what to do.
Conservative MP Joy Smith and NDP MP Françoise Boivin, thank you for joining us. When C-Shift returns, we go international and find out just the big difference that can be made when one woman decides it's not going to be this way for her daughters.
Here are some of the stories making headlines this week.
Voters turning their outrage into online worldwide trends.
Why healthcare workers kill.
The opioid crisis is a health crisis.
So how do we weed out the noise?
Well, this is an issue our next guest is an expert on.
We have a lineup of religious leaders from the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish faith communities.
I'm Lorna Dueck.
And I'm Sheldon Neal.
And I'm Molly Thomas.
And you're watching Context Live.
PureFlix.com is now available in Canada. Sign up today for your free 1-month trial and begin streaming over 3,500 titles.
It's from independent films to movies and short series.
Kids shows. Sign up for a free month. Give it a good try.
Watch your favorite content anywhere, anytime, like PureFlix original hit series Encounter. Enjoy the latest and best in faith and family entertainment, available to you at the click of a button. Visit PureFlix.com and sign up for your free trial today. Brought to you by Crossroads.
Prostitution's the only career that would end with this generation's if every single mother was given a choice. I don't know a single prostitute, not one, in 15 years of working, in my 8 years of being out, and I don't know how many mothers I know, none of us want our daughters to be prostitutes.
I heard about you from your daughter's prayers. Quiet Briarcrest Bible College in the middle of Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm.
You had a daughter going there. She didn't want anyone to know you were in the trade, but because Shona was speaking out at Briarcrest, your daughter came and said, please, please pray for my mom.
Yes.
What was going on that your daughter would say, please, please pray for my mom?
She knew I was a prostitute, and she was Christian, and she believed that I could be redeemed, and she believed that Christ loved me and didn't want me to be there. I was her mom. She didn't want to see me doing this. And she told me about Shona while I was still in the industry, and I refused to have anything to do with it. I wasn't ready to leave. And she would, pin Bible scriptures on my door, my bedroom door. So when I would come home from work, I would see little scriptures that she would pin up about how God loved me and I was beautiful and worthy.
And how did you finally enter that beautiful, worthy world of God for you?
I had ended up in a situation when I had left prostitution. It was actually a customer who had helped me escape with his promises of he would support me and help me get on my feet. And I became his private prostitute. So he ended up leaving me, and I had nothing. I had no job, I had nothing again. So I considered going back to prostitution, and I had already been advocating and helping women leave. But I felt backed against a wall. And I had been offered through my daughter, she has a couple in the church who had offered to pay first and last month's rent for me, and I would have nothing to do with it.
I have heard, I've heard Christians doing that other places.
Yeah.
They offer first and last month rent, and it's, okay, so did you take it then?
I didn't. I actually made an appointment with an old customer, and I went to the hotel room, and I realized at that moment, if I did proceed with going through with that, I would never come back. And I took it. I took the money, and in taking that money,
the church couple's money. You took the church couple's money.
Church couple's money, and in doing that, I felt obligated to attend church. And I was...
Heard that before, too.
So I started attending church, and they were offering an Alpha course, which I ended up going on, and
That's like Christianity 101. Alpha, on our website, is Christianity 101. It gives you the basic understanding of how you follow the spiritual truth God has for your life.
Exactly. So in the 9th lesson, I left Alpha very broken and drove around until about 12:30 a.m., and I just broke. And I said, okay, God, I have tried to fill my voids through drugs, sex, material things. I'm willing to give you a chance. And at that moment, I honestly tell you, Lorna, is that peace that I have searched for, that emptiness that I have looked to fill, was filled.
Okay, Evan, explain why you agree with the Supreme Court throwing out the prostitution laws, making it wide open for prostitution in Canada.
Definitely, from my own experience, one of the biggest barriers that I face, and one of the places that I think I felt the most threat of any violence was actually from law enforcement. So during the decade that I worked, I was constantly in fear of losing my housing, my partner, and my teenage daughter being charged with living off the arrears. It made it very difficult to have safety networks in place. As an outreach worker, I definitely have seen what happens even when Johns are being targeted Suddenly, people have to drive the prices down, which actually results in more prostitution, because when you're not making enough money to support your living expenses, your housing, etc., you have to work more. So unfortunately, with things like the Nordic model, what ends up happening is that we have to work more. Also, a lot of our sort of higher...
So any regulation is going to make it more difficult for women in this business, you feel?
Definitely.
And it will only further victimize
Exactly.
you. Okay,
exactly.
Shona, in Winnipeg, would you support the Nordic model? You've just heard Evan say she doesn't.
From my research, I find that that is the best model we have presented out there, and that it's already able to be just adjusted a little bit with our, with our laws in Canada, as well as I have counseled women for 2 years in prostitution, and not one of the men or the women wanted to be there. They said if they had another choice or some way to get out, they would. Now, with that Nordic model, we're going to set up something, as far as I understand, that's going to offer that to women or men who are in prostitution. They want to get out. They saw no other choice. Let's give them a choice. That's what it's offering. And it's also, when I did John schools, I spoke at many John schools, and the John said the only thing that would keep them from going out and doing what they're doing is if they were to be charged heavily. This little slap on the hand that they got in a $500 fine to go to John school, it wasn't enough.
Well, on paper, Tony Schneer facilitates the Prostitution Offender Intervention Program for the Saskatchewan Ministry of Justice. He teaches at a John school. Hello. Tony, we had that little look at a customer. Tell us who the Johns are. Tell us about the people who buy sex.
In my experience, Lorna, the gentlemen who buy sex range from 18 years of age to the oldest that we've had in our program here was 86. They come from a wide cross-selection of everyday life. They're professionals, they're white-collar workers, blue-collar workers, they're unemployed, they're students. They're really, in many respects, an average guy, quite unlike often our stereotype is.
What motivates them to want to buy sex?
Victor Malarick, in his book, The Johns, and the research that he did, discovered that many Johns are uncomfortable in relationships and often seek out this because it's an easier way to go. Sometimes they're in need of power and control, and this provides a way for them to relate to females that gives expression to that. Oftentimes they've seen things portrayed in pornography that either their spouses or partners are uncomfortable with, or they want to act it out with someone else, and so they will choose to pay for someone.
Okay, now I want to ask you if you can set aside your role as a government worker at the John School and now put on the other part of your life, and that is you are a Christian counselor, a Christian marriage and family therapist. Mm-hmm. When working on these sexual addiction issues, you bring in the story of God. How does this work?
We know from some of the research that Patrick Carnes has done is that some of the core beliefs for men who are struggling with sexual addiction is that I'm basically a bad or unworthy person. I'm unlovable. If I have to depend on other people to have my needs met, then I'm sort of in trouble, and that sex is one of my most basic needs. And here I think is really where the gospel message becomes quite relevant to men who are struggling with sexual addiction, because it sort of answers those questions. It responds to those fears and those doubts and those anxieties that they have. And as they're able to move towards the gospel message, a message of love, of acceptance, that's not based on who they are or what they've done, but on the love of Christ, then some of those basic questions get answered in a way that makes acting out somewhat redundant, if you will.
So what would be your hope for people buying sex?
Mm-hmm. I think I would sum it up in the language of awareness. First of all, it would relate to awareness of their own brokenness and the reality that the gospel speaks to that. I think also a sense of awareness in terms of how to meet some of those legitimate needs that underline their behavior. Obviously, they find self-oriented ways of meeting those, and for them to find healthy ways of meeting legitimate needs, I think could be a really important case for awareness. And then lastly, I think it's really important for men to come to a place of realizing that it's not so much in terms of what they can take and receive, but rather it's in how they contribute and give to their communities, to their society, to the world in which they live, that oftentimes meets some of those deeper needs in a really important way.
We hope you enjoyed this week's show. See you next time.